Okay. So, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Shift Book Club. I'm Sam Baker, and I'm delighted to be here with Sarah Vaughan, author of this month's book club pick, based on the true story, which you'll see over her shoulder. But I'll just hold it up for you now in case you don't know what it looks like. Yeah, you've got your display all very professional, very professional. Sarah is the Sunday Times bestselling author of six novels, including the international bestseller Anatomy of a Scandal, which was translated into 26 languages and turned into a Netflix hit that starred Sienna Miller, Michelle Dockery, and Rupert Friend, and was watched a stunning 200 million hours in its first month alone. That's got to be some sort of record, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think we were still, it was April 22. So I think it was Easter weekend as well. So I think there was quite a captive audience. We were still weren't wildly sociable, I don't think necessarily in spring 22. We were all sort of emerging. And I think it was an Easter weekend. So that I think it dropped on the Good Friday. So people could, yeah,
Yeah, talk
binge it.
about talking yourself down there.
Yeah,
I can't
sorry. Yeah.
imagine that a man would ever have done that.
No, no,
Um,
no, of course they wouldn't.
Anatomy of a Scandal was followed by Little Disasters, which is currently on Paramount Plus, starring Diane Kruger, and Reputation, which I think is my personal favourite actually, and has been optioned by the team behind Anatomy of a Scandal. If you've been reading any of Sarah's books, it would probably come as no surprise to you that Sarah was a journalist for 15 years and spent 11 years at The Guardian as a news reporter and political correspondent. Usual thing, if you're watching this live, please post your questions and comments as you think of them. And Sarah and I will pick them up as we go. And we'd love to know what you think about the characters, who you love, who you hated, who you identified with, who your attitude to changed as the story progressed. So just go for it. Um, as I said, we'll do our best to avoid spoilering, but if you haven't finished, just drop me a note in the chat box. So thank you for joining us tonight, Sarah. It's lovely to see you.
No, it's really lovely to be here. Although it's slight sort of pandemic vibes, I think. I did a lot of when Reputation came out. No, in fact, when Little Disasters came out. Little Disasters came out 10 days into the first lockdown, and so I did loads and
Oh,
loads of
great
events on
timing. Yeah.
Zoom. Yeah, but I've done a lot of podcasts, but not that many book clubs. So it's really nice to do this.
It's just the easiest way to get everybody together, really, because Laurie is here and she's in the States, and
Oh
we're
wow!
all over the UK and some from Europe, although there's nobody. Isabel is are you in Dublin, Isabel? In Ireland, definitely. So, it's just the easiest way not to exclude people. So
Lovely.
let us start. Well, why don't you start by just giving us a quick overview of Based on a True Story from your perspective?
Okay, so based on true stories, a psychological drama about power, money, lies, and family narratives, which starts with a body on a storm-lashed North Cornwall beach. Famous children's author Dame Eleanor Kingman has gathered together her family and friends to celebrate her 70th birthday and her latest bestseller. But someone's been sending emails threatening to expose her and the narrative that she's maintained for half a century. She's got a TV crew arriving, as well as sort of, agents and illustrators and colleagues. And they're supposed to be sort of filming a retrospective of her career, and she expects it to be a hagiography. I think that's what it's called. But she's sort of intent in discovering who her nemesis is, and sort of preserving this victim on which her reputation and her legacy depends. And it's kind of having written some sort of quite dark, and you're right, I love Reputation. I'm really proud of Reputation, but dark thrillers with themes of sort of stalking and very newsy themes. I was conscious that I wanted, I think, in the wake of the pandemic, to write, a bit more of a puzzle, a bit more of a sort of Christie for the Instagram age. So it's consciously got lots of red herrings, and it's meant to sort of, allude back to, and then there were none, where everyone gathers at, a remote setting, and there was meant to be more of a sense of tying up ends at the end of it. Oh, and it's also a feminized King Lear.
Just throw that
Yeah,
in.
throw that one in.
I want to talk about that in a moment. As I was going to ask you because I've heard you talking about kind of the roots of Anatomy of a Scandal and Reputation particularly. You've talked a lot about them lying in the kind of demonstrations of entitlement and privilege that
Yeah.
you were, oh, the cat is really making himself known
Mm.
here, that you were exposed to as a journalist. So what were the roots of the story if based on a true story?
So this
Okay,
was
here he is.
really
Right.
quite, oh, he's beautiful.
He
Um,
thinks so.
yeah, really lovely. All black, completely black.
Yes, yes.
Very lucky. Okay, that's a good omen. Yeah, you're right. So Anatomy of a Scandal, particularly, and Reputation are about sort of a very entitled, rarefied world, aren't they? And they're set in. If people haven't read them, no reason why you should. They're political legal thrillers, and I really drew on my experience working in the lobby and working in Parliament and covering court cases, and also being at Oxford with anatomy. So that I guess that gave me an insight into power, and I'm obviously, I think, quite fascinated by power and social mobility and entitlement. And so I wanted to really explore power, but within a domestic setting. And again, social mobility, because Eleanor, the protagonist, she's 70, she's a boomer, and I know they get quite a bad um, uh, shift, don't they? But she's been born to really quite humble beginnings, but through education, she's been able to be socially mobile, to reinvent herself. I've seen that not to that such a degree, but for instance, my dad was, a grammar school boy, the first, of his family to go to university. His parents had left school at 16. I've seen that with my in-laws as well. My husband's grandmother, left school at 14 to work in a factory, but then his dad went to university. So I think it's something that happens with that generation. And so Eleanor manages to become powerful, I suppose, through education. And I was very conscious that I wanted to explore that, as I say, but within a family. And within that domestic setting, the other sort of the element of it. So I want to look at power, but I suppose my starting point was really that I thought I've written a lot about motherhood, but I haven't written about siblings. And I'm an older sister I'm an older eldest granddaughter as well of an eldest granddaughter. And I was watching Succession, which I was briefly, well, I was not briefly, I was quite obsessed with. I loved Succession. And I was watching the end, I don't know if people have watched it, but I was watching the end of season 3, where there was this amazing scene towards the end of it, where Kendall breaks down in the sort of Tuscan, I think it's a car park in the Tuscan dusk, and it's a kind of looks like a tip trick, and he's talking to Shiv and Roman, with whom he's been warring, and he admits to killing a waiter in season 1. And there's this moment where there's sympathy, they come together and they're supportive, and they all decide they're going to take on their dad together. And you briefly, it sounds ridiculous, but I started crying. I mean, I think it's a perimenopausal thing. I probably cry.
Yeah.
I cry at innocent smoothie ads, but I started crying, and I thought this is the emotional heart of the show. It's not just about this sort of, autocratic patriarch. It's about the relationship between the siblings, and I'd really like to write about the siblings. And then, of course, that cohesion can't continue because there's no jeopardy. There's no reason for the show to continue for another season if they're all working together, and they very quickly fragment again. So I had this really strong feeling that I wanted to write about sisters. I suppose thinking about sisters and Succession, I then thought about Leah, and then I thought about, well, I like writing strong female characters. So I've done a barrister, a paediatrician, and a female MP. I'm not really interested in writing about a strong father figure. Succession's done it so well. Why would I want to do that? But I would like to write about a strong, I really like her, but in some ways she's a very narcissistic mother. She's had to be really tough, but she's quite ruthless in that respect towards her daughter, and she's also exploited her daughters, and she's sort of, certainly the youngest one, she's monetized her childhood, So that was where all of that came from. I've always been fascinated by children's authors. I was a very small child. I was brought up in Devon. As a small child, I remember being taken to the bookshop in Dartmouth that was run by A. Mill's son, Christopher Mill, and being told, don't mention that he's Christopher Robin. And a bit like, don't mention the war in Fawlty Towers. And I was like, just said, oh, where's Christopher Robin? Because I was about 8 or something. And I've since read, I think it's called The Enchanted Places. He's dead now, but it's his memoir of his real ambivalence. He kind of, I think his mum had wanted a girl, and he was sort of preserved as this sort of child with a pudding base and or very feminine haircut and a smock and these animals, and then went off to boarding school where, can you imagine how he was teased, I think. But, his father was a bit more of a sort of more Edwardian and distant, even though he'd obviously written these amazing children's stories. And I think I was also aware of I think there's a Blyton documentary, I think I must have seen it on Netflix, um, in which I think her daughters, and again, one of them wrote a memoir, talked about how she would have these groups of, adored readers who would come for afternoon tea with Blyton at her house. And, she would present as this wonderful woman. And yet, I think she was a real bitch to her daughters. So I think that there's this, and I also knew, sorry, both Kenneth Grahame and Alison Utley, who were kind of, Edwardian, I think, children's authors as well, had had sons who died by suicide. I think possibly their only children. So there was this real disconnect between the appearance and the image that children's authors were portraying and the actual reality for their children. And I think all crime novels and psychological thrillers certainly, although I'd say this is a psychological drama, explore that disconnect between appearance and reality. So this seemed to me a really sort of interesting source of tension. I think you also see it with
Yeah.
Instagrammers as well. You can see there's going to be down the line. I think I was conscious there was this sort of, some American case of a teen bringing a consent case against a parent who'd kind of a monthlymincer, who is that what they're called, who kind of put the children all in.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's a very long story, but so those were all that I never, it's never just one source of information, inspiration for me, but those were all the little bits that were percolating away.
That's so interesting because as you were talking, I could feel it all the different little elements of the jigsaw puzzle clicking into place in my head. And that succession scene, because I was thinking, which was season three? What's she going to be talking about? And then I was like, yeah, I can really see that scene
It was such a
really
strong scene,
vividly.
wasn't it? Yeah.
Such a strong scene. And you're right, it couldn't have been maintained because there would have been no jeopardy and there would have been no story. But those kind of family, I mean, I'm fascinated by family dynamics in part because I don't have a lot of siblings. I'm an eldest sister, eldest daughter of a youngest daughter, actually. And
Oh,
then her mum's one of millions,
yeah.
kind of Catholic thing. So it's not, but I'm an eldest daughter, and I always think when I'm talking to women on the podcast, I always want to know where they kind of are in the family pecking order because I think it really does shape them. But it was so interesting to me that kind of Jenga of sisterhood, and always really fascinated in. I was talking to someone about memoir and memory, and who owns the story, which is such an
Yeah.
integral part of this. And they were saying, you can have three siblings sat around the table at the same, would have been at the same meal at the same age on the same day, and they will all have a different memory of that experience.
That was a
And
really strong feeling. Yeah. And my sister and I will remember she remembers so much more of our childhood than I do. And she can remember things that I have obviously blocked. And she also, yeah, her take on things is different from mine. I mean, my mum says, "Oh, there's as many truths as witnesses," and that I think that's why I write from multiple points of view, and that's what I wanted to
mm,
explore here as well. And I've got for people who haven't read it, I sort of subverted I think I can say that, can't I? The Goneril and Reagan are kind of the good daughters here, and the spoilt younger one. There's quite a big gap. I think there's sort of 7 or 8 years. Originally, it was even more than that. So the younger daughter, Delia, has had a markedly different childhood. So she's been a muse for her mother, and when her mother's 8, she has a massive bestseller. And so they move house, and she is then brought up in the house with tennis courts and an orchard and a boating, boats from the bottom of the garden and things. And the older sisters haven't had that at all. And so that it's almost like they've had slightly different childhoods. If you're sort of 20 when your younger sister's 9, then that's very different, isn't it? Your perception of childhoods and things. But I do think you're completely right. And it depends when. I think it's your family position, and it's also the age you are when large family events happen, that might be traumatic events, how you sort of how they hit, whether you're neurodiverse probably as well, so all things like that I think really impact.
yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, I hardly know which thread of that to pick up. I mean, because Amy rather smartly did enjoy the Lear reference and picked up the breadcrumbs. I am such a dimwit that it was only going back over it today that I kind of thought, oh, that's what all the Shakespeare's about, duh. And but Vicky has said there's 10 years between her and her younger sister, so she can really appreciate that gap. But I think even if you've got a small difference between your siblings, I mean, I'm only 4 years older than my brother, but that still meant that I was 14, 13, 14, the first time we had a holiday, a broad holiday. But my brother started having those holidays when he was 8 or 9. And
Mm.
that's still,
Does that
so
still
that's
bug you?
mm, a bit, maybe. I mean, we could go. Don't get me started on this because if you do, I could talk about that for hours. The kind of the being the eldest child and the different way, good and bad, that you are treated than the
Mm,
younger child. But it's
mm.
so, one of the things you handle really well, and I'd be interested to know what everybody thinks about that, is the shifting sympathies, because in the beginning, Delia is just such a vile brat. But actually, once you've started to understand her childhood and the fact that she was um, an unpaid muse, she was the muses are by the necessity unpaid, aren't
Yeah,
they? But that she was a muse her entire childhood, kind of like Amy in Gone Girl,
yeah.
that kind of, completely, uh, I can't think of the word perimenopause, not perimenopause, menopause brain. But I can't think of the word I'm looking for. But like ultimately, kind of trapped in acid
Yeah, yeah. In
as
aspic.
this cute
Yeah,
little character. And I kind of, I often wonder whether when somebody who's been famous in whatever way in their childhood goes right off the rails, whether it's not some,
yeah.
you know, subliminal,
Mm,
intentional.
mm.
Why, but had you already done that work on children's authors before you started writing? Was it something you were always interested in, or was it something you pursued for the
Yeah, I mean,
purposes of this
I
book?
read the Christopher Milne memoir after I decided to start writing, but I think I'd read the Blyton one before, or I was certainly conscious of it. It's interesting you mentioned Gone Girl because obviously I read that when it came out, and it's only when I did a recent podcast that someone said, "Oh, of course, and there's Amazing Amy in Gone Girl," and I had just completely forgotten it. So it's interesting that your subconscious. I mean, I must have known on some sort of subconscious level that somebody had written about a children's author that and that was a character who was utilized by her parents, but I'd completely forgotten about it. But it's a similar thing. I was thinking about, I had this very strong image that Eleanor would have the line drawings, up on her study walls. So, Delia would always be preserved as that 8-year-old inspiration and not be able to grow beyond that. But yeah, I suppose, I mean, this is, of all my books, this has had the least research. I mean, I take it quite seriously, and, Little Disaster, I spoke to numerous paediatricians and social workers, and Reputation and Anatomy, I attended murder and rape trials, and I talked to a police advisor. I mean, I spoke to my police advisor briefly about this. I spoke to a pilot because originally I wrote a prologue in which there was a putrefying body found in water, that didn't make it. But largely it was just drawing on, I think, things I'd magpied over the years. There's also a Hilary Mantel, until I think she died in 22, but she lived in the last years of her life really near where I was brought up in Devon. And she told a story about how she had walked as a sort of working class teenager, staying in the sort of mobile caravan park in the sort of not such a nice area of the coast. She'd walked around the headland from the sort of this area called Ladram Bay where they have mobile caravan homes, and she'd walked around and seen this place called Budleigh Salterton, which is a very sort of genteel Georgian seaside town where they filmed a lot of the Agatha Christie's in the 80s. And she sort of decided she was going to live there one day. So I sort of magpied that, and that became, Eleanor seeing that as well, that sort of, it just sparred something in her imagination. So I think throughout life, I just sort of magpie, cherry pick little ideas, and then they all somehow come together.
You've written your early books were set in Cornwall as well, weren't they?
My second one was set in Cornwall.
Your
Yeah,
second one.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
What
I
made you?
think
No, go on.
yeah. No, I think I it's somewhere that I was brought up in Devon, but it's the place that kind of we went on holidays. My mum's family is from down there originally, although we didn't stay with them. And I have some of my most intense childhood memories, and I have so it has a really sort of visceral. It's kind of like, you know, again I cry when I see a certain view on the Camel Estuary. So it has that real sort of Pavlovian response. But I also think it really lends itself um, to psychological dramas, really, because it's sort of there's the potential for people to get killed with cliffs and tides and things. You know, there's a lot of pathetic fallacy going on. I really sort of in my teens I was a big, you know, devourer of Du Maurier and, you know, things like that. So that the sort of atmosphere of it is almost a character. Um, yeah, and I think it's very beautiful, but it's also potentially very dangerous. So, you know, in a way that you don't, I guess you probably get with Scotland actually, but I don't know Scotland as well. So, or Northumberland or something.
Yeah.
Hope to explore that in the future. I can't keep setting places books in Cornwall.
Oh, you can. I mean, no, Amy, I think it was Amy who said that, you know, the house really is a
Yeah,
character
yeah.
in the book too. There's been a little, while we've been chatting, there's been a little conversation going on about the kind of background insights into the publishing world.
Oh, I can see
And
this.
you didn't have, you said you didn't do any research. Did you,
Oh, I did do that actually. You're right. Someone's picked up. Sorry, the gaps, the relationships with illustrators. Yes, I did interview an agent, a children's author's agent about how much illustrators might get. Yeah, the tiny
yeah,
fee.
I
Yeah,
mean, it's really, that whole section is so, it's interesting on so many levels because, you know, the gap is really, I'm trying not to like hoist myself here. The gap is really huge, but at the point she starts, it's literally her break, isn't it?
yes, exactly. So of course you do it, and you just don't know the difference. And I think actually I cut out. I think I actually edited it down too much. I was quite obsessed with pace, and I think there was also a passage in which I talked about how the publishing house had kind of summoned lots of young women of color, you know, because they wanted to be seen to be
Oh
making.
man,
And then I
yeah.
thought, oh, I'm just going to get too many hate mails, so I'll take that out. But you know, I thought
True
actually,
though, I'm sure.
well, absolutely, because they would want to make Eleanor look relevant. So they thought that by, you know, it was quite cynically, and I'm sure that's done all the time, isn't it? You know, sort of you're trying to make a. Well, that was my guess that I wouldn't put that past anybody really. Yeah, I think that's quite a. I mean, I saw it in journalism, starting out in journalism, being paid less than men. But I mean, that was, you know, 20 odd years ago, or whatever, well, 30 years ago. But, you know, being paid less than men and, you know, not being comparative. I'm sure it's all been more institutionalized since then. But yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot. It's a business, isn't it? Publishing is a business. Um, and there's a huge, what are the other? I work in publishing. The gap is huge. Production, okay, yeah. That's
Yeah.
disconnected in earnings, absolutely.
I mean,
Um,
it's an interesting way as well, isn't it, of illustrating the generation gap, and
yeah, yeah.
you know, talking about Eleanor as the kind
Boomer.
of a boomer, and she does, and I kind of think she becomes more like, the more you learn about her, the more likable she becomes. Or maybe that's just me, but that gap, the way that Aisha confronts it, that really struck me that. I don't think that most women, and I could be wrong, and I'm sure you'll all tell me, but certainly I would never have confronted it at her age. But my experience of having millennial women and Gen Z women working for me not so long ago, is that they were very, very comfortable with going, hang on a minute,
I think so. I
this
mean,
is not okay.
I think my daughter's 21, and you know, I don't think she would say it quite like that, but they are very conscious. I think they're more assertive than we would have been. And it's interesting. I recorded a podcast that hasn't come out yet, so I can't say what it is. For some reason, there's a bit of secrecy. But it was very swankily set up, and the sort of technician who was, I'm sure that's not his production assistant, but anyway,
Yeah.
he was doing all the, you know, the levels and everything, and he was a young guy, I guess maybe about 23 or something. And I said, oh, did I go off on a huge tangent? Because I was talking about when I started off in journalism, I'd done a lot of a lot of work experience for free. And I remember I turned down I was offered 3 weeks work experience on Tatler, but I was told that I wouldn't be paid, and I couldn't afford to do that. And
No.
they said, oh, you will be making cups of tea and rearranging the cupboards. And I was like, I just graduated from Oxford, and I was like earning money temping, and I couldn't take that time. I couldn't afford that. And I often think, what would have happened if I'd done that? Because then maybe I would have. What I wanted to do was move into features. Um, but what I did do was my boyfriend at the time lived in a sort of former squat, and so he let me live with him for free while I accrued some of this work experience, and then I, would go and wipe tables or temp and or be a receptionist and earn a bit more money, and then go and do a bit more. And I was talking on this podcast about how I'd only been able to do 3 months work on the Times, where they did actually pay my travel and lunch, but I was only able to sort of get my real break by doing that because of the kindness of this ex-boyfriend, well, then current boyfriend. And I didn't know how people broke into the arts these days without that, and this guy, it was in Manchester, said I completely agree. And that for me, even though you're a lot older than me, I really identified with what you were saying, and that was really relatable. And it's really difficult for our generation to get in because London's extortionate. My 18-year-old just had to decide, is he going to take up an offer at UCL or elsewhere, and he's not going to do UCL because it's largely because it's so expensive to be a student there, and not the only reason, but a factor. So yeah, so I think that disconnect, that difficulty, and that sense of my kids say, well, we're never going to be able to afford to buy a house, and they'll be graduates, and hopefully maybe I'll be one of those parents who's able to help them, but that won't necessarily, depends where it is, and that won't necessarily be the case. And I think it's very, very difficult for people. I read recently that the average age at which people buy their first property is now 34, and
Yeah, I'm
lots
not surprised. I'm
lots of
surprised
people,
it's even then, to be
yeah,
honest.
and lots of people go, my daughter's friends who are sort of graduating this year or next year know they're going to go back and live back at home because they can't afford the sort of life that their
Yeah.
grandparents would assume they might be able to do.
Yeah. I mean, I often think that kind of girls, kids from my background now would just not be able to get
Yeah,
into journalism.
no.
I mean, such as journalism is, which is a whole other
Mhm.
conversation, simply because, you know, I, like you, had to temp and if I couldn't earn any money, I couldn't pay my rent. So it was just, I do think that it creates a self-fulfilling class issue, which kind of takes us back to Eleanor, where that generation there was a window of upward mobility that I probably snuck
Yeah,
through as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, Ellie has just said,
yeah.
Eleanor's multimillionaire, yet she pays her daughter low wages. You know,
I think
is
probably the
she
second.
is she a matriarch providing for a family, or is she a narcissist who's turned her daughters into employees to keep them tied to her? Well, yeah, I would say the latter, but
I think they're not low wages. That, I mean, it's five figure. I mean, I imagine that Rachel was getting, about 60,000 or 50,000 or something. So, but she knew that she could earn an awful lot more in a different environment. But she wants to. Rachel, Rachel and Gilly are very aware that Delia has kind of is the favourite, and that
mm,
she automatically has kind of more of a right, I guess, to although they're not as crude as talking about inheritance, but she has more of a right to be part of the Eleanor Kingman estate than they have, and so they have become employees. They're not directors. I thought about giving them places on the board, and I kind of fudged all that really because I didn't want Eleanor. Eleanor's a control freak, and I wanted her to sort of maintain that power. So yeah, I don't. I mean, it surprises me when people talk about her being a narcissist because I kind of thought she had sort of narcissistic traits, and she's obviously harsher than I had intended her to be, which is really interesting because I could see strength in her character, and I think she's admirable in some ways. But yeah, she's incredibly unfair in that she is keeping her daughters tied to her by sort of giving them little tidbits, but not really giving them enough. And she's
yeah, I
treating them
mean,
like children. She's not treating them like grown adults in that respect.
yeah, I mean that's really true, isn't it? None of them are treated like not just Celia, none of them are treated like
Yeah,
adults. But I would be interested to know what everyone else. Yeah, the Vicky said
yeah,
Eleanor is very much a woman of that
yeah.
generation. I felt like I had met her before. But I would be interested to know if anybody felt any empathy or sympathy for Eleanor once they started to learn her backstory, or whether you're all just a very hard line in the sand on Eleanor and no crossing it. I would be interested to know that. Um, what was I going to ask
I
you?
think I
Something's
also,
just gone out of my head.
yeah, I was going to. Can I pick up on something that that Vicky says as well? She says Ellen is very much
Absolutely.
a woman of that generation, and I think I was very conscious. Maybe not women who are 70, but maybe who would now. So I'm 53, so maybe now who would be early 60s. I I found in journalism that the women who had been, I'm hoping they're not on this podcast, not on this, but the women who were kind of 10 years older than me, who had um, were in editorial positions, who there were two who both had husbands who'd become sort of house husbands to enable them to be, to really forge ahead on a national newspaper, um, were were not keen to cut me any slack at all with sort of childcare and things. And so when I went back to work after my first child was born, I had to do a lot of Sundays because I was health correspondent at that, or one of the health correspondents, and it sort of fell that I seemed to be sort of on call a lot of Sundays, which actually meant that you did have to write because there would always be completely made up splashes that were, cures for cancer in the Sunday Times. So half of your Sunday would be about checking, contacting the Department of Health and somehow cobbling together some sort of story about this. And my husband was a junior doctor at the time and was working a lot of weekends. So it was, practically quite difficult with a very active toddler who was kind of, I mean, maybe I could just sat in front of telly for hours, but it would have been hours, and you can't just keep a toddler, you can't just do that to a toddler when you're, trying to write something as well. So I remember, you know, and then there were other instances where I'd sort of, you know, she was with a childminder who wouldn't take her, obviously, when she had norovirus. So, I had to sort of call in sick because she couldn't, little children pick up lots of bugs and you can't always put them in childcare settings because I couldn't afford a nanny. So I was sort of using a childminder. And, I can remember that a lot of resentment and a real sense of, sorry, this is my point, a real sense of not throwing the ladder back down, almost like we've
Mm.
attained that level and we've managed it. And you've got, Tony Blair's come in and he said that there's going to be, you've got sort of childcare vouchers and there's a bit more help for you. So we've kind of excelled. So why should we help you? You can manage it because we've managed it. And circumstances are different. They had partners who were at home with the children, or but I didn't have that. So and family was 250 miles away. So I was really interested in that sense of I'd like to think I would help younger generations of women. I mean, not that I can really help anybody be a writer, but if I was still in a journalistic position,
Mm.
but I don't think it necessarily happened with the generation above us because they had
No,
it really hard because they hadn't had the childcare breaks and they had to try and do it all. And I think probably by my generation, we've realised you can't do it all.
yeah, I
Um,
think that's right. Vicky has said they're very much from the generation that I did it. It was hard, and why should I let
yeah,
you off easy? And I
yeah,
think and that was something, for instance, like with junior doctors, I think the doctors of the generation above were like, well, we worked 90 hours and we didn't
yeah,
die, so you
yeah,
can.
yeah, exactly.
Um, I think there was an element of that. And also thinking about looking at the women above me at work back in the kind of 90s and noughties, there was also that you can have one. So instead of like putting the ladder down and helping people up behind you, I think there was like a fear. This wouldn't really apply to Eleanor, but there was a fear that if someone else, there can only be one on the board or wherever.
That you're
And
going
so
to
if you help someone else, they might take it from you instead of, it will go. I'm not saying that that was
yeah,
right, but I think there was
yeah,
definitely that kind of ethos
yeah.
going
And if
around.
you fought that hard to get to that level, I mean, Eleanor does it in a way because she doesn't want, her PAs who are kind of, there's a PA who kind of, you know, provides ideas, isn't there, and then tries to claim that
Mm.
she's made those, and also tries to claim something else. So, she's very adamant she's not going to give and support somebody younger who might be, assuming that they would get that help.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite difficult to talk about it without talking about too much about the strand of Eleanor being exposed because it's so
Yeah,
obviously
yeah.
integral to the plot twist. But how did you make the kind of documentary crew stick? Because Eleanor is such a control freak. It's kind of it would be easy to see her going, no, there's no way I'm doing that.
Yeah, I have
End
actually seen
of.
a couple of reviews, people saying, well, why did she have a documentary crew if she knew she had this secret? I think the way I sort of try to explain it to myself, but maybe it hasn't come across, is that, if you tell a story a sufficient number of times, you can almost believe it. So, if
Yeah.
it was like 50 years ago, her secret, and she has spun a explanation of it, and she has told that explanation, and she has not allowed herself, she's kind of put it in a box, and she's not allowed herself to go back there. She hasn't really believed it, but and I'm going to create a spoiler here, aren't I? But for instance, if someone says, have you got siblings, she would say no, because she has told herself that for so long that that's the narrative she needs to persist with. So I think there is an overweening arrogance to her, that she
Mm.
thinks she can get away with it because she has got away with it for so long. Nobody's come and Googled her or found her out, or I thought perhaps her. Okay, I am. Is it all right if I create a slight spoiler here or not?
As
Not
long as it's
really.
not the big one.
No, it's not the big one. So I thought. So if there are people in her past, I thought it was very middle class of me to assume that, because she's a successful children's author, everybody would know who she was. So, I mean, I know who Julia Donaldson is because I read my children The Gruffalo, but
Mm.
I'm not sure that everybody, despite the fact Julia Donaldson is the most borrowed out of libraries and is she the most successful female author, I think, in this country, more than J.K. Rowling and things. Um, I'm not sure that absolutely everybody would know who Julia Donaldson was, because that assumes that they're going to libraries and borrowing books and reading them to their children, and that's not happening with all children. So I was kind of assuming that not everybody may be
Yeah.
borrowing books.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think
That's
I
true.
think I think the answer is that she has come to believe her story so much that she's become almost sort of arrogant, really, and she doesn't feel that she's going to be found out because she's got away with it for so long.
Yeah, she almost believes it
Yeah,
herself. Yeah.
almost feels
We
so.
touched on when we were talking about the pay gap in publishing.
Yeah,
Um you have quite a lot of fun with some of those old school publishing characters.
quite surprised I got away with it. Somebody said to me, "Oh, you're a bit critical about your agent." This was on this podcast, and I was suddenly thinking, I think she's sufficiently robust to deal with it. She thought it was quite funny, but I hope she did. But
Yeah, I can't
yeah,
I didn't picture your I mean, I know your agent and
very good. Yeah,
I didn't picture
she
her.
wasn't. No, she wasn't Carol at all. No, no. But yeah, I think so. I mean, it's about. I think publishing is. It's a very. Oh gosh, I'm probably kicking myself. I mean, it's a very middle class,
Mm.
not particularly diverse world, I don't think, is it? So I think that's all certainly that older style. So that's what I was getting at with the women on the lawn with their glass of champagne and their linen suit,
Yeah.
the men in the linen suits and things.
Yeah, particularly the old male agent who really comes from those kind of 8 hour,
Yeah,
eight
yeah. Oh,
bottles
right. Someone
business
said
lunches.
old school publishing characters are quite true. I suppose I was sort of transplanting old journalists onto him, really, because I haven't got a old male agent. But yeah, I could imagine it. Yeah,
Mm.
but yeah, I had great fun. I always like a bit of satire, but I think
Yeah.
I realised in writing this that I like writing entitled characters. I mean, I knew that from James Whitehouse as well in Anatomy. So I think I
Mm.
like writing. I like writing people who are very different to me. I think that's quite liberating.
There's a question from Elaine who normally comes but can't be here tonight. And I'm wondering, I started it and now I'm wondering whether I shouldn't ask it. She says, at the heart of the book is a theme which is we've talked about already, which is so relevant for our world today, that people with wealth and status often seem to escape justice or punishment for their crimes. Um, was that something you set out, was this that something you set out to do, or was that just something that you're so fascinated in that it just always underpins
I
your
think
writing?
I think that always underpins because in anatomy, I mean, I have to create a spoiler here, but James Whitehouse, who is this old Etonian, Oxford educated Home Office minister, is accused of rape, and he isn't convicted. He gets away with it, although we're aware as the reader that we realise he's
Mm.
guilty. And at the end, um, there's a hint in the book that he will get his comeuppance, which was obviously made a lot more explicit in the show. So in the TV show that became, there's not that ambiguity. We know that he's questioned by the police, which I think there's more of a hint of in the book. But I think, and in Reputation, um, somebody gets away with something, and I was interested. I went to a book club, and I'm talking slightly in code here, but a lot of people were quite incensed, and they were like, they felt that justice hadn't been done and that had been too kind on this character, which I didn't agree with at all, because I think I always want you to side with my protagonist. So yeah, there is an element of getting away with it, certainly at the end of this book. But I knew that I wanted a scene at the end of the book before I started it. I knew I had this image of the bit of a Macbeth illusion, not a King Lear one, but I wanted the three sisters to be going around the bonfire, and those not to be the weird sisters, but them to be, these actual sisters. And I knew I wanted them. I really am going to create a spoiler here, aren't I? I knew I wanted the resolution that I had there, which I felt was narratively satisfying, even if it wasn't morally the right thing. So, or even if it wasn't legally the right thing, if I can say that. So I thought it
Yeah.
was more satisfying for the reader to have that. And I suppose I wanted I didn't want, as somebody said, I didn't want Eleanor to be exposed. I didn't want Eleanor to be exposed, no.
No, I mean, another question that's a kind of addendum that Elaine asked was, did you ever consider a different ending?
I knew that I am creating a spoiler. I knew that no, no, no. Like the
No,
police
you
turning it, no,
didn't. So are
no.
you one of those writers who knows the end before you start?
Yeah, I did know the end before I start. I don't plot it all at all, but I probably know the ending before I start. Yeah, like the book I'm writing at the moment, I know the ending. Fine, that happens, and the final scene.
Oh, I had visions of you having this massive kind of like mind map because there's quite a lot, isn't there? I mean, there's multiple
Complex. I
viewpoints.
know.
Yeah, I
No,
mean,
I
there's
wish.
multiple viewpoints and multiple voices, and you've got the backfilling is, masterfully done, the backstory.
I write a lot of
I,
notes, and I do have lots of post-its like this, and lots of index cards. This is a new one I've just abandoned, and I do have to change around stuff in a structural edit. But I was saying to someone today on a podcast, I wish I could do an Excel spreadsheet. I'm really technophobic. I kind of I'm writing, starting to write scripts now, so I'm writing in first draft. But I've never been able to get to grips with Scrivener.
oh,
I
I love Scrivener,
do you?
love it.
I just frightens me. I lost some copy on it. It absolutely frightens me. I don't know how to do I mean, Hilary Mantel used it, but I just don't know how to do the beat thing. On the first draft thing, you can do it like a beat board, and I don't really understand how to do that. I can't move boxes. I probably need to have somebody to teach me how to make an Excel spreadsheet. That would probably make my life a lot. But I'm really old school. So on this wall over here, I've got an A2 piece of card with lots of post-its in different colours for different points of view. That's about as far as I go.
Well, that does the job. It's the
For
same.
sure. But I think it would be swifter if I had it all on the computer.
Oh God,
I could
Amy's
move
just
things
said she
around.
put a whole book on Scrivener and lost it, and that is giving me.
That is absolutely what terrifies me.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's terrible. That's making me feel quite sick. I just want to go back to a really
Oh gosh, there's
interesting
one bit.
question from
Yeah.
Ellie, which is why do you think the public eye is the most effective monster in a modern thriller?
it's like a public hanging. That's really good, isn't it? Well, I suppose that's, I mean, my previous book was called Reputation. So I kind of obviously hark back onto the same subjects. I don't know. Why is there? Oh, I think it's this sense that we have, it creates huge jeopardy, doesn't it? If you've set yourself, I suppose I'm interested in characters who have a lot to lose. So, you know, characters who've set them, successful characters, I guess. So, you know, Kate Woodcroft, who's being a barrister who doesn't want to be exposed for something she's done, or Emma Webster, who's you know, a female MP, and she's sort of really feminist MP who's sort of campaigning against revenge porn, and you know, the stakes are quite high because she's standing up in Parliament and sort of proclaiming against this, and then something awful happens in her private life, and Eleanor has, you know, has sold over 40 million. Anne's another cat. 40 million books, and she's a children's author, and she's this sort of national treasure, and she's been made a dame, and so the stakes are quite high for all these people with their sense of reputation. They've got further to fall, haven't they? So I think that allows for a lot of jeopardy. It allows for a lot of, in Reputation, it allows for stalking and trolling and that sense of menace. And there's more to expose. People go to more extremes when there's more to lose, I guess. Is that a bit of a flannelly answer? I think that's a
No, not
really good
really.
question. It's a
It
really good
is
question. We do
that
also
whole
like
public shaming thing, isn't it?
that public shaming thing. There's a bit of Schadenfreude, isn't there? I think that we like to see people um, be exposed. Yeah. Um,
You just
yeah.
mentioned screenwriting.
Oh yes.
Were you involved in writing the scripts for your books that have been adapted?
No. So I'm an executive producer. So I think that can mean a sort of vanity
I mean
title, you know,
anything,
to get
can it?
more money. I think because I'm a bit of a control freak, and probably because I love doing things collaboratively, um, I wanted to be really involved. So I was really lucky with Anatomy that I think it probably started because it was due to start filming on. Well, I discovered in March 2020 it was due to start filming in June 2020, and obviously we know what happened. This was March the 9th. I was told this, and obviously we know what happened in March 2020, and so the filming was put back till November. So I was able to be more involved in the scripts and read all these different scripts, and also because they were being written by David E. Kelly and Melissa James Gibson, who were Americans, and David E. Kelly read law, I think, in Boston, you know, and wrote
He wrote Ally McBeal,
Real,
didn't he?
exactly. But the American legal system is very different from the British legal system. And I had chosen these, I was really lucky. I had three different sets of producers who wanted to make the show. But one of the reasons, well, the main reason was because Bruno had made Big Little Lies. But they also were very clear that they wanted to keep it in the UK, whereas the other producers had wanted to set it in Princeton and do it in the States. And so I was really clear that the legal element had to be right. They said, you know, we'll ruin the texture if we don't have it in the UK, which I thought was a really clever thing, because that sense of entitlement and class
Mm.
is, you have it in the States, but you don't have it in the same way. And so I thought it was really important that we maintain that. So for me, it was really important that we kept the legal element right. And before we brought a KC on board, which we did at my insistence, and they were fine about it, but I was reading all the legal bits and sort of running them past her, and you know, trying to sort of work out what was accurate. And then with the Little Disasters, the same thing happened, and in fact I was more involved with those scripts because the writer of the first four episodes, we had a different writer for the first four episodes and then a different one for the last two, and it was quite a rush at the end. And so and again, it was a tricky subject. So it wasn't about consent, but it was there was a safeguarding element. It's about Little Disasters, about perinatal OCD, which I experienced after my second baby. And so just as I wanted consent to be really accurate and entitlement in Anatomy, I really wanted to make sure that we didn't sensationalize something that is quite scary anyway, and that we were accurate about it. So it's not postnatal depression, it's a form of postnatal anxiety, and it's not people lining up tins. You know, it's people imagining that they're abusing their babies. I mean, although obviously we weren't going to convey and this thankfully didn't happen to me. It wasn't sexual abuse fears for me, but it was seeing myself throwing my baby down the stairs or against a mantelpiece or things like that. So I didn't want that to be conveyed in a schlocky way. And so I was really, really involved, even to the extent of, writing the copy, and we redubbed some of it so that it was absolutely word for word accurate, that the actors hadn't gone off script at all. And so I was very involved with both of those. And then with Reputation, we've got a pilot script, and I was involved with that as well. So on the back of that, I've started to do some screenwriting, because I kind of thought, actually, I've had 3 that have been adapted, so I might as well have a go myself. But nothing's been greenlit or anything, so it's not what. And it's been really fascinating and quite difficult to work in a different medium and learn how to do that. As well as trying to write different books. So I'm trying to streamline it a bit and focus on that for a bit, and then I've got a book deadline as well. But I don't know how people do it really fast, manage to write lots of books, and there are some writers and screenwriters who manage to do that, but I'm not quite at that level yet. But it's been fascinating.
No.
I think it's, having been a journalist, I really miss working in a newsroom with lots of sort of witty insight from other people. And I think certainly when I worked in the lobby, that kind of attracts some of the sharpest minds, really. So that, I love the buzz of that. And I found it really creatively exciting to have lots of different eyes on projects, and to be part of that, and to see both Little Disasters and Anatomy become complementary but different beasts to the books, and to see, what everybody's brought to that. So I've seen that as a really positive thing. And, it feels like I feel really lucky that I have had, one journalistic career, then writing books, and then, now I'm managing to do a bit of screenwriting as well, hopefully, or, certainly give notes on them.
Yeah, it's extremely jammy. I totally understand what you're saying though about that, because writing is quite solitary, and as
Oh, I hate
a journalist, I'm quite solitary, very solitary. I really miss that too, not that so much the collaboration, but just like that other people's
Yeah.
minds
Yeah.
that help spark your own.
Mm.
Did the exposure to the scripts affect how you wrote this novel based on a true story? Did it affect your
Yeah.
approach to that?
Yeah, I think that it's really impacted on my writing. And interestingly, that it's been based on true stories, being bought by French publishers. And the when the editor writes an email, asking to buy it or whatever, she said, I can really tell that you've been influenced by the TV shows, because I think I've always written, hadn't realised, even my first book had like 5 different points of view. I didn't realise that, you're not meant to sort of start your first novel with numerous different points of view. I'm quite indecisive, and I've never been able to just, it's a bit like that. It's a bit like talking about sisters having different perceptions of their childhood. I've always wanted to have lots of different takes on a event or
So
a story.
slightly hedging your bets.
Yeah, but also I think it's that as many truths as witnesses idea as well, isn't it? That we all have a different perception of, I can have a conversation with my daughter or my husband, and we can both sort of read subtexts into it which aren't there, sometimes,
Yeah.
So, and I hadn't realised that TV particularly, and I'm sure film, loves strong female leads, loves writing from different viewpoints. And I could see that when I went on set with the Anatomy, and I thought, why are we only filming 2 scenes in a day? But we were filming it from sort of 8 different camera angles, so you're getting everybody's different points of view, and then you can play with whose point of view that scene is being told from. And beautiful settings, and I think so all those things translate well into TV shows, and I think I've ramped them up a bit in my books as a result. But I think I've also noticed that I'm writing probably shorter chapters, and I'm shifting viewpoints more, and I'm also probably consciously leaving scenes on a bit more of a cliffhanger, because I'm
Yeah, yeah.
imagining that. So I think all those things fed in. But certainly, I think the clearest indication was I was writing Reputation when I was giving notes on Anatomy, and I went on set at the it was the last day they were filming on set, because it was March 21, and they still had some little locations to do, but it was the last time on set, because I was only allowed, because if I got COVID, if I gave anyone COVID, then you know, they were all right. They were done. I had to have 2 PCR tests to go on set, and as I turned up, and and the producer said, what are you working on now? And I said, oh, I'm just finishing uh, this book about a female MP, and they subsequently bought it, you know, on me just sort of pitching it there. I was really lucky. But in writing it, I was thinking, and again, naively, I hadn't clocked this, but I was watching the scripts that were coming through and the different versions of the scripts for anatomy, and I was thinking, gosh, that really, you know, the House of Parliament and the River and the Old Bailey and Mayfair and all these areas just look really good. You know, they're loving it. This looks really good as a TV show, and I hadn't realised how. Obviously, I'd worked in these settings, so I knew they were beautiful, but I'd probably taken them for granted a bit. And so in writing Reputation, I was thinking, well, you know, I used to work off Fleet Street, or I would walk there, and where's interesting? Oh, I'll walk past I'll walk past Smithfield Market, you know, and that's, oh, there's a good metaphor there, isn't there? And somehow London, all the bits of London, and I was writing it as well. I was writing it through proper lockdown Reputation, so you couldn't travel more than 5 miles or kilometres or whatever it was, but I was able to use Google Maps or my memory, or, you know, and just sort of somehow go back to these really picturesque bits of London, knowing that they would work well in a show. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I really
And you,
went through that.
I think it really shows in Based on a True Story. I think it's really, really, really visual.
Yeah,
Can
I've
you
always
tell
loved.
us?
I was going to say I've always loved. I mean, I think that's why I went back to it. Interestingly, I reread a bit of my second novel recently, and I was like, oh, the pace is too slow, because I spent far too long describing Cornish hedgerows. So with
Yeah,
this, I don't think I probably cut back too much. I sort of pruned my Cornish hedgerows literally and took out descriptions of them here. But I hope I've done enough to, as I say, I think the setting really lends itself to a show like this, or a book like this, and yeah, I wanted that to be a very, very main part. But I mean, it hasn't been optioned, but I could really see it being played out as a TV show, and I suppose I had a slight eye on that as I was writing it as well.
yeah. No, I can really see it too. Um, this always happens. It's like it feels like you've got hours, and then all of a sudden the time's gone. It's just crazy.
Oh,
Before we wrap up, can you give us a little hint about what the next book is? Are you kind of, are you carrying on with the kind of Christie-esque locked roomness of Based on a True Story? What direction are you going in?
I can't, because I haven't talked to my editor about it yet, because I'm at a little bit of a crossroads. So I have been writing another sort of Christie-esque one, but I have also had something on the back burner that actually is my script. So I'm actually going to complete the book of the script, get that done, and then go back to the Christie-esque one, and then we will see which one. Hopefully both will get published, but I'll see which one I suggest first, if you see what I mean. It's a bit
Wow.
cryptic. So I have been
Oh,
working very unproductively, because I've kind of been promoting this, trying and failing to think of a second series of Little Disasters, which now isn't going to be a second series, which is fine. Writing a script with one cast of characters, and then writing this closed room, not set in Cornwall, but in another setting that I've worked in before, not lived in before. And so that was 4 projects, and I just I couldn't maintain any momentum with one project, you know, without sort of then having to start again at the beginning, almost with the next one. So I'm streamlining it. I've got 12 weeks now until the start of July, in which I'm going to finish the existing thing I'm writing, and hopefully get the script finished. And then I will turn to the Christie-esque one. Yeah, that's the plan. Hopefully it
oh my
works.
God, not much then, not
I
much to
probably
do.
shouldn't be saying that, because I haven't discussed that with publishers actually. So anyway,
Fine.
hopefully they don't
I'll be
watch this.
fine. They'll probably just
Uh,
take it
yeah.
all.
So it's yeah. I'm just trying to look at. Oh gosh, I'm looking at some of the comments.
Yeah, yeah, the
Oh yeah. So actually,
gambling
I did
thing.
do some research, Amy. I did do some research into Double Trouble, and I think it's in the back of the book. I spoke to someone from a support group that actually the England illegal money lending team. There's a more pithy, it's got a more pithy name to it, but that's what they're calling themselves now. And this woman, Kath, told me about, how people, you know, get into trouble because it might be somebody on the estate who's lent them money to get school shoes, and then they can't pay it back the next week. And so it doubles. And so quickly your 50 quid to get your, couple of kids' school shoes or whatever becomes, 3 kids, 100 quid, and then it becomes 200 quid, and then it becomes 400 quid, and then it's, really, really quickly it ratchets up. And I could see that if you had a gambling habit, it's that sort of, well, I'll win it back and then I'll make it okay, won't I? And then very, very quickly that could happen. And there was a case of a surgeon in a Middlesex hospital who was being a moneylender for this. So, it was kind of, really reputable, apparently, people were kind of being these sort of loan sharks, and this was happening. So maybe it wasn't Middlesex Hospital, I probably shouldn't say that either, but there was, there has been a court case with that. But so that was another area of research that was quite interesting to do. And Tom's story, actually Mad Tom rails in the Heath in Lear, but Tom's story was designed to, it produces a sort of ticking clock, because we know we've got this sort of, time scale, and there's a bit of a chase. And I wanted to create a sort of red herring, so I won't say any more, but I wanted a sense of drama that he brings to it. And also he's a nice man, but he's a bit of a weak man, isn't he? And so that's Rachel's problem. They all slightly got problems, haven't they? And that's Rachel's one. So and her reason to actually want this money and to do something a bit, again, I'm creating a spoiler, but a bit dishonest. So that's a reason to and to have an animus. So they all need to have animuses against their mother, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was no shortage of that. I think we've covered everything, haven't we? We are,
Oh, someone has said, so easy to know someone who's had to bail a grown child out of 50k gambling debts.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
and you
Yes,
could
and
see how that could
completely.
happen.
I some streaming thing. I can't remember what I was watching, and it was. I think it might have been on Paramount Plus. Or actually, I've noticed, not that I really ever watch anything on Channel 5, but I'd watch something on there. And it's all this foxy bingo. It's the pink bingo isn't it? And it's so focused towards, it's girls having drinks, and it's so aimed at women watching that, And I think it's really wicked. Thank you. It's good paste. Metal wall and magnets. That's a really good idea. um, I think it is the public eye. I think it's like us all taking a delight in sort of public figures that are kind of found out, isn't it? Yeah, it was harsh that Eleanor wouldn't do that. Uh, the I think though I try. Well, if you can understand Eleanor's past, then that was meant to help mitigate against the harshness. Really, obviously didn't work. And West London, somebody said, and I lived in. I mean, I've lived all over London, but when my daughter was a baby, I lived in Chiswick, and that the fox was. I remember just one night, I don't know if I was pregnant then with my second child, but I just remember feeling very hemmed in. No, I wouldn't have been in my maternity leave, and just walking down to the South Acton Park where I would take her on the swings and things by the train tracks, and this fox just ripping apart a bin bag and like having this chicken in its mouth. So you never know and just looking at me, how their eyes glow in the dark, phosphorescent, and just like having that moment where I was feeling a bit of a desperate female, and she was being a bit of a desperate female too. So that's where Frida came from. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you
that's
for loads of
brilliant.
comments.
Sarah, thank you so much. You've been great, and I think you could go on for ages, and
I could, and I
I
stop.
could let you, and they could totally let us. Just before we wrap up, I just need to quickly. I've already announced next month's book, so it's no surprise to you. But if you missed the email, next month's book is The Wilderness by Angela Flornay. And if which most of you are book club regulars, that might be ringing a bit of a bell, because when Lily King came and did the book club, was that December, November? Can't remember. She was raving about it, though that's mainly why we've done it anyway. So yeah, you know the drill with that. Thank you, Sarah. I've loved talking to you, and you've made me really want to go back and read Reputation, actually.
Oh, great. Okay, well, I'll
Quite
let you know
tempted
if
to do
anything
that.
happens with it, because I could really see that. I could really see that as a TV show, actually.
I really can. Yeah,
And
keep us posted.
yeah, I will. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Good
Bye.
night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.